We identify the 10 tribes of Israel with peoples of Western nations, the peoples of Scandinavia, of Finland, of Denmark, of Norway, of the Netherlands, of France, Belgium, Northern Ireland, Scotland, England and Wales, and the offshoots overseas in the USA, in Canada, Australia and New Zealand. That is where those 10 tribes are, in those areas. And we have certain criteria that hold up, that convince us. And that we also really see that people who came from outside, who came into those countries and became part of them, also included amongst them and descended from them. But there are those who claim, for instance, there are those who claim, there's a certain scholar who's quite learned. He agrees with us on the whole, but he also claims that the lost 10 tribes are to be found amongst the Spanish, amongst the Portuguese, and we disagree with him on that point. And so too we have others who claim that the lost 10 tribes are in the nations that we mentioned, but they also say they're in Germany or other places or other portions of Europe, as well as what we say. We said that lost 10 tribes may have been in those areas, may have passed through those areas and migrating to points further west. But the majority of them, those who were there, already left and already moved to their kinfolk amongst the other tribes. And we have criteria that we use to determine who belongs to those 10 tribes and who do not. Originally there were 10, then we reduced them to 7 by combining several, and from that 7 we reduced them to 5. And these criteria derive or evolve from the 3 major principles that is what is required of someone to belong to the 10 tribes and wants to return. To begin their return, they should believe in the Bible, they should accept the Jews as Judah, and that the lost 10 tribes, identified as specific nations and groups, are now present among Western peoples. So those are the principles. And what criteria do we use? We use 5 criteria scripture. That is the biblical evidence. The Bible tells us where the 10 tribes will be. It describes the geographical settings, what they will be doing, that they will be at the ends of the earth, the ends of the geographical extremities, that they will be in the north country, that they will be to the north and west of the land of Israel, that they will be associated with the Atlantic Ocean, with Tarshish, ships of Tarshish, the Atlantic Ocean, that they will be in islands, and so on. And when you take all of these different indications together, you get to the west, peoples of the west. It also says that they will be in Zarephath, which Rashi explains to mean the land of France. And according to other commentators, says it's above known by France and England together, or Ramban, Nachmanides is the whole land of the north. At all events, these geographical points of provenance indicate areas having their loci in Western Europe, and including those who emanate from them. So that is one point, scripture. Scripture also tells us what characteristics it will have, and how we may recognize them, and what signs and emblems they will have. And taking all of these different points together, Scripture tells us very strongly which countries belong to the 10 tribes and which do not. Another point is historical feasibility. That is, we can show from archaeology, through legends, through linguistics, and related historical sources, that there's a pathway of migration. A pathway of migration from the areas of the 10 tribes, from the areas of the 10 tribes to the west. And even Jeremiah himself, in Jeremiah 31, he says to set you up waymarks, set you up signs, and he uses Tamurim and Sionim in Hebrew, which words, according to Radak, and Barbanel, and actually all the major commentators mean heaps of stones or stone monuments. And in effect they describe the dolmens and the khans which were around the dolmens. And these show a pathway of migration from the Middle East, from the area of Israel, including the area east of the Jordan, from the area of Israel, including the east of the Jordan, and into southern Syria. That's where they originated. And they show a pathway of migration, or two pathways of migration, one going upwards to the north to the Caucasus area, across the Caucasus to Bulgaria, and from Bulgaria to France, from France up into Scandinavia and across the sea to England. Another pathway of migration was from that area through the Mediterranean islands, Sicily, Malta, Sardinia, onwards into France, and also into Ireland and England, where they converge. So that is what the pathways with these megalithic monuments show us. And they are built in such a way with an incline on their roof of 23 degrees that is not found elsewhere. You do find that monuments, stone monuments elsewhere. Find them a few in Japan, a few in Korea, in Ethiopia, but only those in the west from the land of Israel have this incline of 23 degrees on the roof. Which seems, and this incidentally seems to be universal amongst those of the west. So that is a point worth noting, as it was deliberately inserted there, or at least it allows us to identify, to distinguish between those megalithic monuments showing a pathway to the land of Israel and those that do not. And in addition to that, as we said, historical, we saw scripture and historical feasibility. Judah and affinity with the Jews, they show this is relative to other countries, relative to the nations around them. In the long term, relative to history on the whole. They were less anti-Semitic, less anti-Jewish, and often philo-Semitic in some ways, in some important occasions, than others. So that is what they have. An affinity with the Jews, they should also have be a light to the nations, be a civilizing influence on other people, because that was the reason for the exiles. Hosea speaks of this several times. The book of Hosea, incidentally, is almost entirely devoted to the 10 tribes. And Hosea speaks of this, and Rabbi Yosef David Moshe Valley, a great rabbi, he was a learning partner to the Ramchal, or he was a rabbi of the Ramchal, or the Ramchal was his teacher. It's not certain, but all events they were together, and they lived at the same time in Padua in Italy. And he wrote books on the Bible, on the scripture, many of which are just being published now, even though they were available in manuscript form for hundreds of years. And on his commentary to Hosea, in the book of Hosea, he says that Joseph, Israel, the 10 tribes, Ephraim, he refers to Ephraim, was exiled and lost in order to lose his identity, to go down to the level of the Gentiles, and then to elevate himself upwards and bring the Gentiles up with him. And that is what we've been saying all along, because it's in the Bible. But here we've been saying it because we found it in the Bible, we found it indicated in the Bible, and so Rabbi Moshe David Valley gave expression to it long before us, but only recently did we become aware of it. It's always good when you understand something to find it affirmed by people who are greater than you and lived long before you. That you're not making a mistake, or not going into areas that are you shouldn't go into. So that was a point. And in addition to that, like to the nations, there should also be intrinsic evidence. Intrinsic evidence, that is characteristics that emanate from the soul of the people. That is, at some time or other, groups of them should have identified themselves with lost tribes of Israel, or identified themselves with Israelites. And there should be legends concerning this. There should be ways to identify them according to their tribes, tribal characteristics and so on that come from out of that they themselves have produced, proving this point. So those were the 5 criteria that we have used: scripture, historical feasibility, affinity with the Jews, light to the nations, and intrinsic evidence. Now, a scholar, or will write a reply to him, a scholar who himself has done research on this subject, in some areas of quite importance, so he disagreed with these criteria. For instance, one of them, the thing about being pro-Jewish or relatively pro-Jewish, he says that does not always apply. And others have pointed it out to me, the same thing. For instance, the British were, in the course of their history, the English people at times were anti-Semitic. So were other peoples. The French were also anti-Semitic at times. They killed Jews, they persecuted Jews. And they did not treat the Jews as well as they should have. Okay, so we do not hide from this reality. We do not brush it over. We face up to it. We even publish articles about it. We are not afraid of it. This has to be coped with, such quandaries. But we find on the whole that despite these periods of persecution and these periods of bad relations between the two groups, that there were also times of genuine altruism, genuine identification with the Jews. Important people amongst them identified with the Jews, helped the Jews, and relatively speaking, relative to their time, to the culture they came from, to the peoples around them. On the whole, they have been more pro-Jewish than other groups. The British helped establish the State of Israel. The Balfour Declaration, if you look at it, doesn't really say much. It sounds like a genuine, simple letter of good wishes, that they help the Jews establish a national home in the Holy Land. This could be interpreted to mean a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily mean giving them the whole of the land, or anything else. Encouragement is not necessarily included there. But we found that it was, in fact, the British understood it to mean that the Holy Land would be given to the Jews, and that they would be helped to do so. And there were long periods when that is a policy that they followed, and that was what understood to be their legal obligation. Churchill spoke on this often. The Zionists spoke of it, and the mainstream of the British administration did not deny this. Their attitude was hot and cold, but on the whole, right up until 1939, they were more for the Jews than anyone else and anything else. In 1939, they tried to backtrack, okay, with the white paper. But when they backtracked, they did not say that they were doing it because that was how they were reinterpreting the Balfour Declaration. They were saying that the situation, the change in the situation necessitated a change of policy. The policies can be changed if the situation warrants it. That was how they explained it. They themselves explained what they were doing as changing the policy. And this was wrong. This was a grave offence on their part. But it's worth noting that up until then, as they themselves said, they were responsible for the State of Israel becoming what it was. And they helped the State of Israel, and despite everything, when the British first came to Palestine in 1917, there were about 20,000 Jews in the area. Actually, there were more, there should have been more, but due to the First World War and a famine and disease in Jerusalem, and the Turks expelling many of the Jews who were subjects of foreign countries, since many of the Jews had been in Palestine then. They were subjects of Russia and so on, and so they all had to leave, so they went to Egypt. So there were, so officially there were only about maybe less than 20,000 Jews in all of Palestine. So say if we include those who were outside the country, we would come back shortly afterwards, 40,000. And that 40,000 from 1917, by 1948 it had reached 600,000. 600,000 people living at a Western standard of living, with their own institutions, their own educational systems, their own economic enterprises, their own welfare establishments and arrangements, ruling themselves, governing themselves, expanding the basis of their own army. Okay, all that existed because the British had allowed them to do it and helped them along the way. Despite everything that the British may have done or may not have done, when they attempted to backtrack and so on because of the negativity that later was momentarily installed, it did not reflect on the whole, on their overall picture concerning them, as the Jews now, modern Jewish historians in Israel say, and the British also admit, because they too in the past wanted to hide, wanted to diminish. They wanted to. They didn't want the help that they'd given to the Jews to establish a state to be over Jewry, emphasized because of the negative connotations it had in the Arab world and in the non-Israelite world. And after that, 1948, the Jewish state was alone for a while, received some support from France, some support from other areas. The USA helped even then, and afterwards the USA began to seriously help the State of Israel stand on its feet, and it's been helping us all along up until now. It's also benefited from it, but it made sure that it would benefit from it. They did that, what they had to do, because it had to be done. And of course, if you're going to help someone, you feel much better if you're going to benefit yourself on the way. That's human nature, and that is what happened. And so therefore the State of Israel was assisted by peoples from Britain and dominions, and from the USA, both of which we identify with the tribes of Joseph.